Hello, everybody. It's Stefan from WorkPath here. Thank you for joining the webinar on outcome-based roadmaps. We had a bit of issues of a technical nature, but hope that people can hear and see me now. If I could get a signal from somebody that I'm not talking to a blank screen, that'd be good. Otherwise, thank you very much for joining today. The content that we'll cover today is all around outcome-based roadmaps. To give you a rough idea, we will start with a definition of what we consider is an outcome-based roadmap and how it differentiates from project roadmaps, traditional roadmaps, other kinds of roadmaps that are maybe also in use in your organizations. We'll tell you about the benefits of working this way. What are the outcomes you want to achieve with outcome-based roadmaps, so to speak. And then perhaps the most interesting chapter, talk about common challenges and tips that you can hopefully use to get started using outcome-based road mapping in your organizations, either making a big transformation all at once or in small steps. Both is possible, and we'll get to that later. But first of all, in order to get to know our audience a bit better, and we'll make introductions once we start with the content presentations.
And I'm, by the way, I'm here now, Stefan. It worked.
Perfect. Perfect. So let's maybe then say a couple of words about the two people that are speaking to you today. Johannes.
Exactly. We made it. It took a little bit here, but really grateful for the opportunity for this joint session today. Stefan already made the introduction. It's going to be about roadmaps and particularly outcome-based roadmaps. I think in our work with organizations in strategy, execution, and planning and collaboration, there's a lot of debate about this. From the roadmap is one of our main tools. We cannot get rid of it, and it's going to stay like it is. To do we even need roadmaps in the future? As long as we know outcomes, as long as we know the target, does it make sense to define roadmaps? So I think from that debate in the community, we decided let's facilitate that, and very happy to have Stefan here as our product and engineering leader, who's going to share both his own personal experience from leading product and engineering teams in different companies, but also, of course, what we see in the market, what we see from different companies. And yeah, I'm a little bit more in the back, not just because of this initial technical hiccup, but also because clearly Stefan is the expert. I'm one of the founders of WorkPath. I think many of you know me more on the customer and the account side of things in our organization. And in many ways, Stefan is my counterpart from the product organization. So very much looking forward to the next 30 to 40 minutes with all of you guys. I think you are on mute now.
That's a classic. Yeah. Speaking while you're on mute. We're ticking all the boxes here of things that can go wrong. In order to get to know our audience a little bit better, because unfortunately we can't speak personally with all of you today, even though we'd love to, we've prepared a couple of polls just for us to get an idea of where you're at in your journey towards outcome-oriented roadmaps. So Nico and the marketing team, if I understand correctly, you should be able to do some magic now to make this poll appear. Yes, at least I'm seeing it. So are you responsible for roadmap planning in your organizations at whatever level that may be, the level that you're responsible for? Do you plan roadmaps? Do you maybe have influence on that? Nice. See this converging to a 2/3 majority for yes, you are responsible for planning roadmaps. That's great. Talking to people that can make a difference.
All right. Then we have another one on the topic of outcome-based roadmaps. Do you already work with that? So a bit more about the nature of the roadmaps you work with. Like 50-50, pretty much.
All right, we got a good 30 responses, and around 40% of participants are working with outcome-based roadmaps. That's great. Hope to get some insights from you as well. We're all still learning about this topic. If you think of your roadmapping process, which statement that's about to come up most accurately describes your feelings about it? Is it highly effective, satisfactory but could be improved, largely ineffective, or do you advocate for eliminating roadmaps entirely? Nice. So we've got at least one person that is advocating for eliminating roadmaps. That should lead to some interesting discussion later. And nobody that thinks the road mapping process is highly effective. That's good. If it was highly effective already, maybe you wouldn't need this webinar in the first place. And then last question before we actually get started. Road mapping doesn't happen in isolation, and perhaps you have a framework that is being used to control delivery, an agile framework, or another framework that has to do with outcomes such as OKRs in combination with it. So just to get an idea for what outcome-based road mapping interfaces with, let's see what this question brings.
For that, you can just use the chat. So that's not a poll. Just on the right side, leave your comments, and of course, keep it short, but how many words you need, that's going to be really interesting. Lots of OKR here, yes. Monica asks, what do we define as a roadmap? Do you want to take this right away, Steffen, or can we wait for this for a moment?
I think it's our definition of a roadmap is 1 or 2 slides away. So I think it's a good cue to get started with the content of this presentation. But yeah, lots of users of OKRs, OKR-ish, that's my favorite.
And so that's a couple of times.
And save a couple of times. Nice. Thank you for giving us that context. Really interesting composition in the audience today. So let's get started. We first want to define a couple of terms, because what is a roadmap? There's many kinds of roadmaps. What is an outcome? Before I dive in, I wanted to say a couple of words about myself. I've been in product and engineering leadership positions for the last 15 years or so in startups all of my career. So that is going to color everything that I say today, even though I know from conversations with tons of big companies at WorkPath that largely the concepts that I'm talking about today translate to any kind of organization. It just may have a different name. So every now and then the term product feature roadmap will slip through because I've been building products. But a project roadmap as a concept fits just as well. I've been responsible for up to 80 people across 12 teams at one point in my career, and introduced outcome-based roadmaps, introduced OKRs, and failed at it, and more than once, I have to say. So that's probably what qualifies me most to speak in front of you today. Later on, I did succeed, and that's really something that I'm always looking for when it comes to things like OKRs, outcome orientation. The things that read like a marketing brochure, OKRs are just a silver bullet, and there's no issues at all. I don't trust those materials. I want to learn all about failures and actually practical tips. So I hope I have a couple of those. With those startups that I've worked in, I've reached some interesting outcomes. I've actually sold AI technology to Google and worked quite closely with the engineers there to implement it. So I perhaps could have told you already, let's say 8 years ago, that Google was not the best at applying AI to its own products. Today, that's public knowledge. Everybody knows that. I've also co-created products with Bing that back in the day just copied everything that Google did. Also, that has changed. and other bigger American companies like Indeed and Glassdoor, those websites where people write bad reviews about your company, basically. And I've seen outcome orientation in different forms in all of those companies. Google obviously is an important user and definer of OKRs. And all of those companies had OKRs in some form. A word that I never heard when working with those companies was sprints and Scrum. Interestingly, that's not as present there as it is, as you would think it is. So just to give you an idea for where some of those learnings and insights come from, that's my background. So definition time. What is an outcome-based roadmap? Let's start with roadmap. We consider a roadmap somehow an overview of current and future priorities. A roadmap should tell you this is what you're currently working on achieving, and then future priorities come after that. There's many variations here. You might have those future priorities slotted into specific timeframes. It may just be a backlog that you draw from, but that's a roadmap. It's outcome-based if on that roadmap you see outcomes, not output. So let's talk about that distinction a little bit. Output is everything that is a project, it is a feature, it is work. So this is something that gets done, but it doesn't tell you why you're getting that work done, and it doesn't tell you about the impact of that work. That's what outcomes are. Outcomes have many valid definitions. It can be about customer value, and that's the definition that we'll focus on today. You can also talk about the outcome as a business impact, like we want to be more profitable. That is also an okay definition of outcome by me. It's better than not having an outcome. We'll narrow down our definition of outcome on the next slide. This is very, very broad. There's lots of nuances about road mapping that we're not covering here. You can have external roadmaps, you can have internal roadmaps. Internal roadmaps are perhaps there to serve as guidance for your team and to tell them what's coming next. External roadmaps have a whole different character. They're more expensive to change because you evoke expectations that you actually stick to your roadmap, but sometimes new information comes in and you do want to change it with an external roadmap that's different. And also, of course, you have roadmaps at all kinds of different levels in your organization, at the very top of the organization, in departments, in teams. All of those can be roadmaps, and they interlock with each other. So what is made to be a simple concept here is actually quite complex, but it will serve for the ideas that we'll present today. Let's give a more precise definition of what an outcome is. The definition that we think is best to work with is that an outcome is a description of a value that you want to create for a specific customer. And specific customer, it means you should specify who the customer is, who the beneficiary of that value is. And you should write this in terms that are understandable for a defined audience. So here we come back to the idea that a roadmap is made for an audience. If it's just internal to your team, you can use all the team lingo that you want. If it's supposed to be understandable for others in your organization, as OKRs are expected to be generally, then you should write it in a way that others understand it. And then if it's external, of course, it should be understandable by your customers. We also think that an outcome is best if you can combine it with a set of metrics that tell you things. For example, a metric that tells you whether you're actually delivering this value. That way, it doesn't become a matter of opinion and discussion, but you're measuring, I actually delivered this value or not. It may also come with a metric that tells you whether you're impacting a business KPI, whether you have measurable impact on your own business. And ideally, it comes with some leading metrics that as you're doing the work to achieve the outcome, they tell you whether you're on the right track or not, and then give you a chance to course correct early on. And then over on the right, in these gray boxes, depending on where in the life cycle of an outcome or OKR you are, you've got these ideas for how you actually want to deliver this value that turn into concrete project ideas at some point, or feature ideas, and get delivered. So these gray boxes are what we consider traditional roadmaps, where you talk about, first I'm going to do project 1, then I'm going to do project 2. And an outcome-based roadmap flips this around and starts with the outcome and then associates possible ways to achieve it with it. It becomes a roadmap if you arrange outcomes along a time dimension, like you do here. So we've got some examples for outcomes that actually come from real examples of what we do here at WorkPath at the top, and the output, the stuff that we're doing at the bottom. And I underlined some words here that help you recognize projects that are not always called projects. So whatever you're working on, shipping something, that's pretty on the nose. You realize that that's describing work. You also find these version numbers, like let's do conversations 2.0. Like we've talked about conversations long enough. We feel like there's something to do. Let's do 2.0. That also raises the question of, okay, what are we actually aiming to achieve, or are we just collecting a bunch of work together that is unrelated and not really achieving any specific outcome? Also, things like redesign, revamp, refactor can also go very far without a defined outcome. So it's especially important, if you see the word redesign, revamp, to take a step back and think about the outcomes. I won't read all of the outcome examples at the top. What I've done now is I've shown outcomes along a time dimension, but how do you actually order outcomes by priority? That decision needs to come from somewhere, right? So we're going to amend the definition that we made earlier of an outcome-based roadmap, that it's also a road mapping process which prioritizes outcomes first and then derives the projects or initiatives or features from those outcomes. So you're doing outcome-based road mapping if you regularly, every 3 months, every 6, every 12 months, whatever the cadence is, ask yourself the question, what are the most important results we need to deliver in the next 3 to 12 months? And to answer that, you need information from a couple of different sources. You need a strategy of some sort. Without a strategy, a full outcome-based roadmap process is basically dead on arrival, because your different departments, teams, units will not know what to do, and they will optimize for the goals that are known to them, and you will get silos. So if your organization does not currently have a strategy, or more likely, if it's not known to you, then you have to cover that information gap first before you make a outcome-based roadmap. Still, without clarity of a strategy, sometimes organizations are in between strategies where they're working on a new one. You can do small steps towards more outcome-oriented roadmaps. We'll have more on that later, but a full process requires a strategy. It requires some kind of future goal that your organization is telling you to achieve. There's other sources that go into your road mapping process. Things like KPI targets you need to achieve, of course, but also customer feedback and research. There are probably other boxes like that that didn't occur to us. But the point here is that if you communicate outcomes that you want to achieve to departments and then teams, you need those teams to be empowered with information to make their own decisions, because you're not telling them what to do. They need context in order to make their own decisions. That's one of the kind of beautiful but also difficult things about this process. So customer feedback, research, all these insights and feedback loops to the market need to be present at whichever levels you're doing the road mapping on. Otherwise, you're doing decisions in a vacuum. We could have a whole webinar, a whole multi-day workshop really on this slide here alone. We're scratching the surface today. But that is generally what we mean by outcome-based road mapping. And in the end, something like this would come out. You would have a current cycle, maybe that's a Q1, that would have an outcome that you're working on. For simplicity, it's just one outcome on the slide, but you can have multiple outcomes depending on how you work and how big the unit is that you're road mapping for. And you could say something like, our customers can break down their strategies along highly complex organizational structures. And the feature that we're delivering to fulfill that is something called business units. So that is a feature that comes from the actual WorkPath product. And it is a real thing that we worked on in the last year. But there can be also other ideas and other tasks that we're delivering in order to fulfill this outcome. It depends on the specifics of your organization, how you handle the time dimension in a roadmap like this. For example, how far into the future do you commit projects? You can do, you can achieve, let's say, a high degree of outcome orientation if even in the current cycle, You have the capacity to cancel projects if they're not delivering the intended impact, and you're able to invent new projects that maybe are supposed to achieve the outcome in a different way, right? So in order to have that freedom, you would not commit projects in the current cycle to any external stakeholders, because then it wouldn't be possible, or it would be expensive to stop them again. That's a very high bar to set, and even for us as a startup, that is not always practical, because features that we're building get communicated to customers. We have other departments that align their work with the features that we are building. So getting to this point where you just kill projects quickly within a cycle, that is a very high bar to aim for, and I'm not sure it's possible in all organizations. Instead, what we do is, before we start the project, there are things you can do, tricks you can pull from the product management toolbox that you can do to de-risk your project, so that you have a fair amount of confidence that you're working on something meaningful before you start it. Also, depends on the specifics of the organization, how far into the future you communicate outcomes, and how specific you get with the timeframes. So here we have a kind of a mixed roadmap, where we have a current quarter, we have the next one, where things get more specific, even though the project ideas haven't been committed to yet. And then afterwards, it's just an ordered backlog. Again, depending on the specifics of your organization, stakeholders might expect you to be more specific about what's happening in the future, but how many times have you actually said, we'll totally do this thing 4 quarters from now, and actually done it? It doesn't often happen, right? Usually things happen in the meantime. So I think this kind of length of time into the future, current, next cycle, and then backlog, is a pattern that works pretty well.
Maybe, Steffen, if we can take a moment. There were 1 or 2 questions. Not sure if anyone can see me, but I hope you can at least hear me. I think, at least in the beginning, Microsoft Teams decided I don't look appropriate today. So there's a question from Monica. The workshop that you mentioned, maybe, Monica, you can help specify, because that's probably 1 or 2 minutes ago already. Which workshop did you want to know if that was already scheduled? And then we have a question by Linda, if we have unvalidated feature ideas on the roadmap, like difference, and a second question, I guess, differences between features and projects.
Thank you, Hannes. Yes, indeed, Monica, if you could clarify which workshop you mean, that would help me answer that question. In the meantime, Linda, unvalidated feature ideas, yes, I think between these gray boxes down here, the feature ideas, there's a whole life cycle of, it just came in, it just was created somehow, it's unvalidated, to validate it, to specify it, and ready to build for engineers. And that's just what I was about to explain, that within this blue box that came up just now, a lot of what traditionally goes on in project management and product management happens. So here, for example, as you start a cycle, you need to decide from all the possible feature ideas that I have, and maybe several of them were validated, which one do I do, right? You still gotta do the work at some point. Talking about outcomes won't save you from that. And this is where things like choosing high impact but low cost activities come in. Perhaps you do price scoring, where you try to evaluate ideas by their reach and impact, but also their cost. So that goes on down here in this light blue box. And then also, once you are committing to certain projects and start delivering them, your delivery processes kick in. So you might have an agile delivery process, Scrum perhaps, and that all happens down there in that box, just to give you some orientation where this roadmap lives in relation to those activities. And I will offer a multi-day workshop on outcome-based roadmaps. Maybe we keep this question to the end. I don't remember saying something like that, but maybe it's also stage fright that something like that was said. But we'll have call to actions at the end of the presentation, where we offer up follow-up conversations on outcome-based roadmaps, because there's plenty that we can learn from you as well here. You might ask yourself, does WorkPath?
I think there was one more follow-up, and we can park it in the backlog. I think Linda had a follow-up question, right? If we have validated a feature, does it then become a project?
Yeah.
It's great. We always ask for more engagement, so we also need to follow up on it.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Inken. I said before that we're only scratching the surface on outcome-based road mapping, and it could be a full-day workshop. That was a figure of speech. We don't have a full-day workshop planned, but if you have interest, then by all means, we'll do it. You'll have links at the end of the presentation on how to get in touch with us, and we would love that. And then the differentiation of project and feature, I forgot to address that question. It basically depends on the type of work that you're doing. So in the context of this presentation, I'm going to use that interchangeably. It's just a unit of work that you need to deliver. It would be called a feature if you're modifying a product. And Monica's in for the workshop. Great. Did I get everything now? I think so. So you might ask yourself, do we have an outcome-based roadmap at WorkPath? And of course we do. Everything is a beautiful outcome here at WorkPath, just as you imagine. No, but in seriousness, we try to live by this in our own internal processes too. And what I'm sharing on this slide is kind of the WorkPath template for how we build product roadmaps. This may be specific to us, so don't take this as a template if your business is different from us, but let me explain. We've got a template on the left of some outcome that we want to achieve, and I'll give an example on the right. I'm a very visual person, and I think it's easy to communicate to customers if you have a design, at least for a possible solution. So very early on, I asked my designer to create designs of what something could look like. You could say that this locks you in for a specific solution, but I struggle to talk in the abstract for very long. So as soon as we have some good ideas of how to tackle something, I make designs and I show those. And then once we write actual OKRs, so that will be outcomes combined with a set of metrics, I choose among the following categories. And you can't always have all categories, but let me explain. Sometimes you just need to measure your output. That shouldn't perhaps be on the same level as a key result, but for the sake of simplicity in this presentation, I'm showing it in the same list. For all those who use WorkPath, the tool, you know that output actually, we display it quite separately from outcomes and key results because it's in a different category. But before you get any other kind of signal, whether what you're doing has impact, you see the output moving. And the idea between these gray boxes here is that as you deliver your project, these are things that go green one after the other, and they can also fail at each individual step. So that's a good set of leading metrics for building product features like we do. The next one is activation. So maybe it makes sense that I talk about the example that I've got there over the right, where we are currently working on an outcome where we aim to enhance executive discussions on KPIs and goals. And we want to do that by offering up-to-date data and focus on critical topics while ensuring transparency and accountability. And the ultimate goal is to improve target achievement. Okay, so somehow we're improving KPIs, and we have another feature that is called conversations, which is basically a guided meeting template. And we're working on that right now. And of course, we are keeping an eye on the % of the work that we've committed to that is done. We measure that by connecting Jira epics to our work and then looking at the overall progress. Afterwards comes activation. So for features that require some kind of jumping some kind of hurdle, or that have some kind of friction to activate, and KPIs and conversations are a feature like that, because you need to set something up and perhaps you need to establish a connection to reflect current values of KPIs in WorkPath. We of course count how many accounts, how many customers have crossed that activation step. So that is kind of the next green light that goes on. Afterwards, you want to measure engagement. So just activating it is no guarantee for anything. Afterwards, you need to measure whether updates come in, whether actions are taken on KPIs and conversations, not just views, but actual engagement. Our definition is action that is taken. Afterwards, you should have a chance to get a signal from customers whether they're happy with what you provided them with. So this could be some kind of customer satisfaction score, For those of you that use WorkPath, every now and then you get those annoying pop-ups that ask you whether you're happy with the part of the application. Whenever you fill that out, it goes into some key result or some KPI that we're tracking. And then down there at the more outcome end of the spectrum, we've got customer value and business impact. Now, these are sometimes hard to measure, but you should try. And you can approximate customer value with surveys often, or by having qualitative conversations is better than nothing. But in other businesses and for certain kinds of projects, you get very quantitative measures here as well. And then the business impact. WorkPath does in the end try to make money with what we do. So for the KPIs and conversations improvements, we have different ways of measuring the impact on our top line. This is a real OKR. What I've done is I've removed the specific numbers, but that's how we work internally. I hope that's useful to somebody. And
thanks a lot for that example, Steffen. Any questions on that, maybe? A little bit detailed, but we try to make it tangible. And yeah, I think, of course, the surrounding might change, but this is something that also works in scaled environments, I would say. Okay, if there's no question, we'll have a bit of time in the end for some discussion and Q&A as well. And I'll keep it very short, given on the input on the poll in the beginning. I would actually just look at 3 benefits with some examples. And why is that helpful? Again, I don't want to be Captain Obvious and telling you what probably most of you, many do OKRs, many have outcome-based OKR roadmaps already. But I think that perspective I'm taking in the second chapter is helpful for arguing with different stakeholders, right? Because what we experience is, yes, management teams, you say like, we want to become more outcome oriented, everyone's behind that. But in reality, you usually still have a mix and a very dominant combination of KPIs, business impact. That's always the dominant thing in the top-down perspective. And then you will still have management teams mostly who also want to be pretty detailed and granular on what will you do, what will you build, right? This gives at least a it feels like security and we can control things. So I think that perspective I'm taking here is helpful for having a discussion why it makes sense to focus more on outcomes in these roadmaps. And then sometimes also, of course, part of that, the flip side of the coin, let go of details on output, particularly if it's more than 3 to 6 months. Yeah. So first, very obvious one, customer orientation. Many of you looking into the room, it's large organizations, so you have a multitude of different steering and planning processes. And even if you already have OKRs, I think using an outcome-based roadmap can be sort of like a quality gate for whatever process already exists, right? This can also be applied to roadmaps in the context of a portfolio or a budgeting process. I would say making sure that the items on your roadmap are customer oriented. You can even do this reverse, right? You have items there already planned. Right now, this might be not a outcome oriented or a customer outcome oriented roadmap, but you could still discuss and challenge the items you have there. And that's what we see a lot of companies trying internally to use this as a kind of like a quality aspect, a quality gate for whatever is on your roadmap now. So for those of you who work with our technology, we have this template where basically we try to enable teams and then the committees who discuss items that might end up on the roadmap to ask the most important questions and make sure for everything we do, for everything we plan, are we clear who's the customer, what's the value for that customer or customer group, and what's the future state we want to create for these customers. So making sure all items on a roadmap have that customer orientation, it's very closely connected to outcome orientation. And again, applying that filter, it always leads to better discussions and progress. It might take some time, and for a very long time, you'll have a mix. I think Steffen comes to the caveats and challenges just in a moment. Not everything will be perfectly outcome oriented, even if you push really hard towards that direction. But using this as a critical thinking framework, how you challenge items on your roadmap, it will not just drive outcome, but even more importantly, from my perspective, customer orientation. and that's very beneficial. Then empowered teams. It's another buzzword oftentimes associated with the world of agile and the transformations that have been happening in the last 5 to 8 years. But I think independent of that, teams who have the ability and the resources not just to execute and have a certain scope of how they work on problems, but really are empowered to also come up with the solutions themselves and experiment. That's what is obviously a major benefit. The angle I would always choose when arguing against or for this with executives is empowered teams. It's not just better for the engagement and the quality of work. It's a question of speed and adaptability as well. Yeah. So with outcome-based roadmaps, you can have this top-down and bottom-up combination that most of the companies we work with strive for, right? A top-down approach where you have a roadmap that already defines epics and very detailed features that have to be built the next 3, 6, 9 months. There is not a lot of room to breathe. And again and again, we've seen projects that were just the involved stakeholders already knew this here doesn't make sense. Once it gets launched, it will not work out. But next year, I want to have my budget again. So I keep investing into that. We keep finishing that output. And I can tell those teams are less engaged. People there are not very happy to work on something that they already know it's a waste of time and resources, but somehow you just keep doing it. Yeah, I think empowered teams are better, not just with regards to their engagement, but with the quality of their work, because they have some top-down guidance, of course. Where are we heading? What KPIs do we need to positively influence? But then you can iterate and you can change along the way over the cycles, over the years at least. What are we actually building? What are we doing to drive certain outcomes that, of course, need to contribute to higher level priorities? Yeah. One example we have is a product within WorkPath, which is the capacity planner. And I think this is a great example in two ways. The idea and the mission for this team building the capacity planner was not build a capacity management tool. The idea and the mission, the problem space was about helping teams to prioritize. How can we enable empowered teams that prioritize bottom up more realistically and that have a better focus? And then throughout the research, through co-creation with many teams, many customers, this team came up with capacity management for teams as one answer, one solution, because they saw that's one of the biggest challenges, allocating resources in cross-functional structures as well. If you don't look at capacity, you will not have your priorities and your focus on the level that you want it. Yeah. So the capacity manager, the way this was built, is a product of an empowered team where we had a problem as a starting point, not a specific list of things we wanted to build. And the capacity manager itself, I think, is a tool for empowered teams because they themselves take more control over their capacity, their time, and decide and map how they can allocate time on operative work versus strategic work, for example. So that's one of the examples here. And keeping this short, because before I come to the last benefit, obviously this can be very well integrated if you already work with OKRs and if you work with something like Scrum on the operative level. Yeah. So on the next slide, you can see how those two can be integrated and how you have basically 2 cycles of adaptability. You have 3 to 4 month cycles where you define certain outcomes. Yeah. And those outcomes might be sequenced in a roadmap. And then the teams who own those OKRs, they have, if you follow Scrum, usually 2-week bi-weekly sprints where they can continuously evaluate, as you see in the next slide, from sprint to sprint, are the things we're building, the outputs we're creating, are they driving key result progress? Are they driving outcomes? And that's how those 2 methodologies can be very well integrated, and how, again, empowered teams in the bottom of that visualization here have a lot of adaptability and ways to learn, ways to adjust, and in the end, just build better products with better outcomes for the customers, which is always better from a business perspective, ultimately as well. And then the last one, Just a couple of company examples where in some of them we've also been a bit closer to their development. This is about organizational flexibility and adaptiveness. What I just shared on a team level, on a product level, I think it is true for the overall organization as well. Yeah. You can use outcome-based roadmaps as one lever, as one tool to create a certain kind of capability on all levels of the organization. And it makes a huge difference if a company identifies and if the culture is focused on creating outcomes for customers or building certain products and selling certain kind of outputs. Yeah. So one or two examples we regularly use, and again, where we are also a little bit more involved there. One great obvious example we all know is Netflix, right? Most might not have on top of their head anymore that Netflix didn't start being a online streaming service, but they were sending DVDs to people, and it is a by many researchers, by many publications, seen as one of the most successful business transformations of the last 20 years. That they probably not seamlessly, but they mastered this switch from we send you a DVD to you can have this online and you have much more access and much cheaper, because they didn't identify as a DVD sender, but someone who creates amazing movie or series experiences. And DVD or online is just a channel. Yeah. Another example, a lot of automotive customers we work with talk about all the time. In the beginning, particularly the Germans, always made fun of Tesla and yeah, the hardware, it's not the great same quality as a German car, but I think they had a blind spot that what customers actually want is fun and cool and unique and different driving experience. They want to get from A to B, yes, but the experience might not be only about the hardware. It is about so many things, and it's more about the software, particularly with Tesla. And basically, you can compare an average product life cycle at BMW or other car makers, still 5 to 7 years, to Tesla that on average does a software update every 11 to 12 days. That's a product of an outcome-based culture and outcome-based roadmaps where the feature, the output, the product comes last. And yeah, we're going to send the slides, so not going into the Airbnb example, but I think also here, great example, Airbnb doesn't identify someone who sells certain kind of output things, but really it's about experience. It's about travel experiences. And during the pandemic, they've been amazingly fast to switch things to online experiences, stay on brand, stay on the outcomes their customers expect from them, but still shift how these outcomes are being delivered. And we don't, in Airbnb's case, we don't know how exactly that their road mapping looks like, but I think it's examples of how outcome-based roadmaps can drive a certain kind of culture and organizational adaptiveness. And then back to you, Steffen. Let's use the last couple of minutes addressing the most common challenges. If you want to push for a more outcome-based roadmap, what can you do? And what are the typical challenges and caveats you typically might run into?
Thank you, Johannes. Before I continue, let me address some very good questions that came in the meantime. About the example of a work path outcome that I showed earlier on the slide, there were some questions whether that's a real OKR, and the answer is yes, although the key results were actually split down into several OKRs across different levels. So I combined it for the sake of the presentation, but also in internal slide decks that we use at WorkPath to communicate our product plans. That OKR was used pretty much like that. When you have a product roadmap that looks like that, do you still need OKRs? Question by Linda. A really good question. We consider the outcomes that you put on your roadmap in that form to be something like draft OKRs, and usually they're at a pretty high level. And then when you actually do the OKR planning alignment, the actual drafting, you do spend a lot more time to make the metrics specific, to come up with metrics that you may have not chosen yet. You all know that if you've used OKRs, a lot of work needs to go into defining the metrics. So the outcomes that are further out into the future generally don't have those metrics yet, because even if you did sit down and define them now, things would change in the next 3 or 6 months, and you would probably have to do that work over again. And then finally, if you have external customers of your roadmap, isn't it too fluffy if you just talk about outcomes? Absolutely. Depending on the audience of your roadmap, you have to choose a point in time where you freeze, you commit to certain work, and then you communicate about that work. It's especially true if you have business customers, then anything between a 3 to 12-month project roadmap might be expected by your stakeholders. More on that in the last chapter. It's different, for example, in B2C companies, where you don't necessarily need to promise your end consumers things that you will do 12 months from now. So you have more flexibility and more flexibility not to commit to certain projects for long timeframes into the future. Going into the last chapter, then addressing the most common challenges. Truth is that, again, we're only scratching the surface here. We could do another multi-day workshop. Let's see if I create a bunch of work for myself here by promising a lot of workshops. But it's a big topic, and we really only have a handful of tips that come from conversations with our customers, from my own practical experience of challenges that you're going to hit when you try to work more outcome-oriented way. And we've chosen these tips so that they can also be applied if you don't have full control of your road mapping process and you just want to sprinkle a little bit of outcome orientation on an existing, more project-based roadmap. So let's imagine that you are working on some project that you have no chance of deprioritizing. If you raised your hand and said, let's do an outcome road mapping process and I want to cancel this project, maybe you would get, in the best case, you would get some looks. In the worst case, you might get a surprise conversation with HR. Let's say you have no chance of deprioritizing this project. What you can do is have clarity on the intended customer value. If the decision was made to go for this project, you should still, even if it's retroactively, document what you want to achieve and for whom. You should try to look for a way to measure that customer value. And maybe you're supposed to deliver some impact on business KPIs. You should document that too. And having this documented for some project, even if you've been forced into that project, is very valuable. It's something that you can use to guide conversations if somebody else, some other stakeholder comes in and wants you to context switch to something else. You can then say, look, the outcome that I'm trying to achieve with my current work is this. Do you agree that it's more important than what you're suggesting, or should we talk? And it's not meant as a shield to just say no to everything, but to do kind of the right decision at that point and figure out which outcome is actually more important. Once you have defined outcomes for projects, the next thing you can do is get in the habit of reflecting on those outcomes after the project was shipped. So perhaps you have something like a review meeting, project is out, yay. Now let's ask ourselves, did we achieve what we wanted to? Did we have the desired impact on business KPIs? This can be tricky because often you don't know this until a long time after the project has been shipped. So you may have to select the time of that meeting consciously. And if you didn't achieve the outcome of this project, should we try again? Is it still the most important thing on our roadmap to try and achieve this outcome? Or should we deprioritize it and work on something else? And if we do try it again, do we follow up with some kind of version 1.1 of this project or try something completely different? That's an interesting meeting to have. And actually, what has happened is that you've kind of eased your way into an outcome-oriented road mapping approach. The questions that I just asked about this project are very similar to the questions that you would ask if you build your roadmap outcome first. And then something that can happen in your organization is that, yes, you do have some projects that are locked in for a certain time, but maybe the review of those projects resulted in some outcomes that were added to the roadmap. And then maybe in some cycles in the future, you can start and actually flip the order around and think outcome first. Also, something that this is a personal opinion of mine, but you shouldn't overdo it. Not everything is a beautiful outcome. I've told you in the beginning of the webinar that I've actually had a couple of bumps in the road on trying to implement outcome-based roadmaps, and this was years ago. It wasn't a specific example, but we basically tried to completely flip our roadmap and talk about outcomes just everywhere. And if your outcome reads, our website visitors are delighted because they have full transparency in how we use their data, it's hard for people to figure out if what's behind that is just, okay, GDPR is coming, we need to make it compliant. Sometimes you just have those projects, especially when it's about compliance, but also day-to-day work that you should just call projects or call day-to-day work. You don't have to wrap them in an outcome. And you can also be in the situation if you don't have any freedom in choosing how you achieve an outcome. If the decision has been made that you're going to create a mobile app, then call it the mobile app project. Otherwise, people will try to read long sentences, make it easier to get jobs done while on the go. Okay, is this the mobile app? That is exactly what happened to me. Call it the mobile app, but definitely document the intended outcomes underneath. Otherwise, you will burn this topic for stakeholders that struggle to read your roadmaps and figure out what's going on. A couple of words about time management. When you have projects, you can estimate work. You can say this project is going to take 3 months, and then we all know sometimes it takes 6 months, but you've estimated work. When you have outcomes, you don't have anything to estimate. Obviously, estimates can only be attached to projects that describe some kind of work. What you instead do is you think of some kind of time that your organization is willing to spend on achieving a certain outcome. So it's more of a budget of time and resources. It's more of a resource allocation. And then, of course, that doesn't happen in isolation. You can't do magic and say, in 3 months, I want to achieve this outcome, go. It has to be tied to some kind of feasible project that can actually achieve this outcome. So it's often a dialogue with delivery teams, but outcomes don't have estimations, they have budgets. And for anybody that is in product management, there's a methodology that is called Shape Up, and it's related to OKRs in some of the ideas, but it's not OKRs. And there we actually have a 6-week delivery cycle, and the 6-week delivery cycle is called appetite. So what do you have 6 weeks of appetite for solving? What is something that you're willing to spend 6 weeks of your time on? So that is what you should think of when you think of time and outcomes. Which stakeholders do you need to get on board if you want to work more outcome-oriented? Everybody, obviously. Transforming the way you choose priorities and measure success for organization is a huge change process. Calling out a couple of important stakeholders, both leadership and delivery teams. So leadership needs to give you strategic direction if that's missing for you. Otherwise, how do you prioritize your outcomes? And then also you'll communicate your plans and measure success very differently than before. Make sure that you have buy-in. That is a mistake that I've made. And then also your delivery teams. If you switch to a more outcome-oriented way of working, that demands a lot from the delivery teams. You should prepare to hear, I can't estimate something that vague, come back with a specification. Many of you have probably heard that from your IT teams. Heck, I've said that. And what you need to talk about then is this kind of thing where you say, okay, what are possible projects that can fit in the appetite that we have for this goal? Let's talk about that. However, those are just internal stakeholders. So even if you convince your leadership and your delivery teams, how do you deal with external stakeholders? If a customer tells you, if you want to win our business, you need to deliver project X by end of 2024. What should you respond? A, should you say, how immature of you? We practice outcome-based road mapping here. Or B, anything else? Obviously, you shouldn't say that. Please don't say it and tell your customer that WorkPath told you to do that. I don't want to take credit for that. So the point that I'm trying to make here is that you can't control the way external stakeholders communicate expectations of you. Some tips on how to deal with those situations is to always understand the need behind, to treat feature requests as information for your outcome prioritization. And I've bolded the second point because it's one of my favorite insights in this chapter here is to tell your teams to try to delight the customer with an even better idea for how to solve their problem. It doesn't always work. Sometimes the customer is right and what they're suggesting is actually the best way to solve something. But just thinking about this will force your teams to understand the outcome behind, to create ideas. And then if the customer's idea is the best, you do that. If you need to say no to the customer and you can afford that, you say no. But sometimes you're able to delight the customer and say, I think I've understood what you want to achieve. Isn't this better? It's really worth it to strive for those moments. It creates a bunch of trust and delight in that moment. And then the next time the customer talks to you, maybe they will come with the problem directly and not an idea of how they want you to solve it. And the conversation will be quite different. Still, sometimes it's necessary to commit to a feature in the future. So you may have to maintain a hybrid roadmap where not everything is an outcome the way I've presented, but you flip it around sometimes and say, look, there's a feature that we have to deliver to win that one client. Don't deprioritize this because we've promised that we'll do it this way. Sometimes that's necessary. Life happens. We're just about at time. I wanted to just briefly mention a topic that we're not able to get into today, which is outcome-oriented organization. There's different words for this. I've heard it called OKR teams. I think it's a term that is not fully established yet. The idea is that in a certain cadence, the organization chooses goals, outcomes, priorities, and then teams dynamically reorganize around that. A pretty radical idea because a lot of conventional wisdom goes around seeking stability, avoiding context switches, and keeping cognitive load low. So this goes against all that wisdom, but I've actually, in the startup space, seen several companies transition to this model for the reason that this ensures that you always have your people working on your top priorities. You never have that effect where a team is chugging along, working on a product that is not really delivering, and you would just love to use those 10 engineers somewhere else. So this kind of topic is not fully explored by us. If you have an organization that works that way, I'd love to talk to you. Otherwise, I'll keep talking to my startup friends and maybe have enough stuff for a follow-up webinar at some point. And with that, we're at the end of our content. If you need to leave on time, feel free to do so. Thank you very much for joining. I'll go through the questions in a second, and if you have time for that, have a final poll in the end to get some feedback from you on how you like this webinar and how inspired you now are to use some of the approaches that you've seen today. Time. I see that there were some questions that came in that Johannes answered in the chat. So if you have any more questions that you feel weren't addressed, feel free to speak up and chat again. And if you are interested to talk more about the topic, know that I am too. And if you'd like to schedule a session with myself and or members of my team in the chat and also follow-ups to this webinar, we'll share some links for doing that. I am not nearly done learning about the topic of outcome-based road mapping and would love to hear your insights and your learnings and also your questions. And then also please mind the spring discount that we have on the WorkPath e-learning program, which goes into the details of the OKR process, which is an excellent process to feed your product roadmap into and make sure that you reach your outcomes. And with that, we're at the end of our 60 minutes together. Again, thank you very much for joining.
If there are any questions, I think Stefan and I have a couple of more minutes, but tried to answer some of them already in the chat. Next time, Stefan, I don't know, I need to dress differently. I need to do something that Microsoft Teams allows me to show my face as well. If there's no questions, I want to thank you, Stefan, already. Thanks for improvising a bit despite the technical hiccups, and thanks for preparing that and sharing all of these insights. As Stefan said, it's planning and road mapping season also at WorkPath. So there's a lot on Stefan's plate, and I was even more excited and grateful to have him here today and have some really hands-on insights from his work. Thank you very much.